Our next panelists are Clayton Whitman, Associate Vice President at Callison RTKL, Medina, co-founder of equalspace.co, Ed Salvato, co-founder of Hospitatural Engagement at Hilton.
All in different order. Oh, you can applaud. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. My name is Ed Salvato. I have the pleasure and honor of moderating this dream team of experts on the session, which is entitled Creating Inclusive Spaces, a look at structural barriers, language, visuals, to messaging. I will say that I'm kind of a novice to this topic, and so you can think of me as kind of an audience member as well, and I may ask some basic questions. And if we use jargon or use language that you don't understand, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. I'll try to also enact that role to make sure we're all on the same page. If you can hold your questions till the end, that's maybe a little bit better, because we've baked in some time at the end. But if there's a burning question, just raise your hand, get my attention, and we'll try to insert it in there. We're going to get started since we don't have too much time. But I do want to thank She Summit, Claudia and her team for inviting us to this. This is really interesting to me personally, and it's a really interesting and timely topic. I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank you for sharing your time and your energy and your focus. So my name is Ed. I co-founded a company called Hospitable Me. We're a small LGBTQ agency, and we help tourism brands connect authentically with LGBTQ travelers through marketing, promotion, strategy, and education and training. So I'm going to let each of these amazing panelists self-introduce, and then we'll get started with the actual panel.
I'm Clayton Whitman. Hello.
Hello.
I'm a senior interior designer at Callison RTKL. We're a commercial interior design and architecture firm based down in the Woolworth building. My practice is mostly on commercial workplace, but the cool twist of that is it comes from our luxury brand retail stores that we design. So we do a lot for Tiffany's, Dior, LVMH, as well as a lot of co-working spaces, the Wing, all-female group co-working space, as well as Notel. So a lot of their showrooms and office spaces, as well as their retail stores. And kind of my specialty is designing those workplaces for the people and kind of creating that workplace of the future for them. One other kind of special thing is kind of really honing into the brand and bringing that into the space. So a lot of wayfinding and stuff like that is also our specialty in what we do.
Nice. Hi, I'm Andrea Richardson, and I lead our multicultural engagement at Hilton. And so many of you might be like, what is that? The panel before us was a nice segue because they were talking about diversity and inclusion from a workplace perspective. In my job, I get to look after diversity, inclusion, and equity for all of our guests. So Hilton is a 100-year-old company, and over the last 100 years, we have served over 1 billion guests, while we have about 400,000 amazing team members around the world, and our HR team looks after sort of their well-being from a diversity perspective. I'm the one that's responsible for looking after you all that don't work for Hilton. So in many cases at corporations, this role isn't even something that some corporations have thought about, but Hilton is a little bit further along their journey. So we've actually put some time and thought into strategically placing a role that looks after our guests and making sure that we are creating inclusive spaces at our properties for our customers.
You dope.
Why, thank you, sir.
Such a fanboy. Hi, everyone. My name is Medina. I am the proud founder of Equal Space, which is a Black and Brown owned and multicultural supporting share space currently headquartered in Newark, New Jersey, and expanding to 5 different cities. And as a founder, my principal aim is to support my team and create access and resources to the most talent-rich and underbedded communities, those that are marginalized and prevented from accessing rooms that should be and have to support the changing narrative of the country. That work usually goes from being the founder to being the super to cleaning to hosting events, but I love the work because every day I get to meet with amazing entrepreneurs and startups that are really paving the way and disrupting industries that we are the majority and yet such a minority of ownership in. So my whole equity world and inclusive world is that.
It's so interesting. Medina wears a lot of hats, some of which are very fabulous.
I wore this hat for y'all, I promise.
So we've already used the term inclusive spaces a few times here. Can you each, just at the sort of 35,000 foot level, define what it means to create or inhabit or encourage creative inclusive spaces? I'll start with the opposite, Medina, so we just change it up a little bit.
Just change it. I got no time. No, just kidding. For me, the way to truly build an inclusive space is from the floorboards up to the ceiling. So it's the subliminal ways that we can affirm the community that really live in a world of now, live in pragmatic situations in their life, and have the audacity to want to build something new and different for themselves. So that takes a intentional design effort, is why I respect your work so much, an intentional design effort behind seeing imagery that portrays them in that strong light, hearing everything. You will hear samba 1 minute, Afro beats the next minute playing in our space. The coffee bar is reflective of Black, brown business owners. We have testimonials on the wall of other successful startups. So really, every day the conversation is, how can I affirm you as a founder? And once you start to do that in so many different ways, I feel like we've hit it. But for me, building the space is a continual conversation every day. It's programmatic, it's space, it's design, and it's how are we verbally and non-verbally affirming founders of color.
Yeah, I'd love to pile on to that. You know, it's also a concept of it being 360, but also very multidimensional, right? So you can think about spaces from an actual physical place where people feel comfortable, for example, at our hotels or at a co-working space, et cetera. But you also have to think about it from an abstract level, right? What types of conversations are being facilitated to bring understanding and respect of the various parts of a person's identity and even their multidimensionality, right? Also respecting and understanding the importance of intersectionality and how that not only identifies and allows us to respect our differences, but it also allows us to see what our similarities are. So, sorry, I get a little bit nerdy about
intersectionality?
This. Yeah, intersectionality. Yes. So
could you define that for the audience?
So I won't give you the Webster definition, but it's essentially a term that really talks about the social identities that we each all have, right, and how those cross. So, for example, Medina and I, we have some commonalities in that we're black and brown. We've got cultural backgrounds that integrate through our Latino family members. You know, for example, Ed and I, we're both in the hospitality space, and we actually have a lot of colleagues that we know. So there's similarities and things that connect us, and I think sometimes we don't have conversations about that enough. Instead, we focus on the differences and try to sort of separate ourselves.
Right.
For me, I think we really pride ourselves in kind of understanding the client. So we approach them as a really in-depth kind of way to figure out who the client is, to design the space for the people, and creating that space that allows everyone to feel comfortable in the space. A lot of them come from a wide range, from architecture to design to graphic design. Also finance and marketing. There's a lot of different people sitting within these different spaces. So how do you accommodate all these different work types, people types, and then also create that space that has that kind of wellness feel to it that's inclusive for all of them. So I think we'll get into some of those later. But yeah, I think really understanding the client and a deep dive of visioning and programming with them and really getting them involved to feel like the space is their own. I think that ownership and letting the client make their mark on their space.
So we're, kind of going from a little bit from the 45,000 foot level, trying to kind of bring it a little bit closer so you can go back to your many different disciplines and places of employment, large, small companies, and kind of unleash influence, which is what the theme of the day is. So talk about some of the key benefits of creating inclusive spaces and maybe the downside of not even considering that. What are people missing if they're not considering that? And I don't know, whoever wants to start, please go right ahead. Looks like Medina might have something.
So the benefits, or when I'm in rooms, I think we're all in rooms where there's like a huge question mark and you have to validate. So
give an example or define that.
I think with VC, I think I'm perpetually
venture capital.
Yeah, venture capital. Sorry, VC venture capitalists are continually out of touch with markets, and I play cultural broker in having them understand some of the very, I really hate bullshit subconscious bias, but the constructs that they have in their head about certain industries, and I've seen them and I've faced them myself. So for me, it's saying like the LGBT community is a niche market and it's a $3 trillion market. I don't know what's niche about that. That's your perception. Those are the things that I think I get called on most often to do, is like translate and mitigate that bias through statistics. Like, my space comprises of 80% black women. Black women are leading $52 billion in profit with less than 0.02% investment. That is a fact, sir. So, you know, having to do that conversation, that dance over and over again, I think is a way that that's my daily occurrence in the situation.
And do you find it successful if you use statistics, for instance, and depends on the VC?
The connective thread there is then they start to see through their value system the opportunity of what that investment that I'm presenting them to. So it's even changing how we propose it. So for me, it's like, let them understand the statistics, and then how do we connect the dots in them making a good decision on a product, and they'll win.
Sure.
So that's, for me, is like, if you don't show them the richness of the community and translate, then they won't provide the access and resources that my startups need so that they can create a product that I know is going to be a runaway hit.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely have to connect with that to say that we have all heard the term that diversity is good for business, and the insights and the facts are absolutely there, right? But from a marketing perspective, so my background is marketing and communications, in addition to my love for bringing people together. We have this thought of, let's take the LGBTQ segment, for example, of marketing to and through the LGBT community, right? Just thinking of the thought of unleashing influence. If you reach one person, you never know how much of a positive effect you might be having on their mom or their dad or someone in their network, right? So it's the thought of not sort of limiting the impact of the things that people might consider to be small, but understanding that people have influence, especially with social media, to be able to tell the true stories and the experiences that they've had with certain brands, right? So I think to a certain extent, people don't want to be honest about the facts that are out there, and we need to have some honest conversations. But also, I think we need to open up the thought process a little bit and understand that word influence and how powerful it can be.
Clayton.
I think a different kind of tangent on that is how our clients come to me and they're like, we're trying to attract and retain a different crowd. They're knowing they need to get on the bandwagon of the D&I. So how do they attract and retain that new crowd for their
a new client
businesses?
base, for instance?
It's actually for like corporate offices. It would actually be for their employees. How do they get the new
corporate
talent
retention.
in? How do they become that new wanted to be a new workplace that people want to work in? And so I think the challenge is creating a space for that. How do you attract and bring that talent in that's obviously getting paid another amount somewhere else if they don't like what the office looks like? So kind of creating
is it just
a
what the
harbor
office
for
looks
that.
like? Can you just sort of describe, like, what are we talking about, like an office space, desks? I mean, the whole...
Yeah.
You talked about a visual and music, and so that kind of was a surprise to me as well. So,
an example for when recently, last October, designed our new office at the Woolworth, and originally we had come from Soho and a design white box loft feel, kind of very designer studio. And I took a huge departure in our new space in the Woolworth. Obviously, we're in a very steel and stone building, and a white box doesn't really feel like it fits in there. And so I looked back at the employees and our clients of luxury brands and the rich materiality of that and the diverse crowd that we've got of employees, and I was like, okay, what does the space need to be? And so we outed the normal reception desk and waiting areas and created a social cafe where not only the employees are eating lunch or having an informal meeting, it's actually where our clients come in and help themselves to the cold brew. So it becomes this more of a communal space in a community. The client gets to see the real employee at work or at lunch, but it's a very open space, and I think that kind of bringing that culture forward instead of hiding it behind a glass reception wall really kind of brings our culture forward and differentiates us from our other competitors. So I feel that first approach into the space is what's really affecting that interviewee.
Plus your obsession with cold brew, right?
Yeah, any kind of brew, right? This brings us to physical spaces, and I'm really curious, Andrea, if you can talk a little bit about, Hilton or just best practices for hotels in terms of creating just spaces and things that we might not even be conscious of as we're walking into a hotel, or maybe it starts earlier on the website or an app, or just kind of walk us through a little bit about some inclusive, both maybe virtual, maybe more physical spaces that in a hotel that makes it comfortable for different communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So most recently, we've launched a couple brands. Hilton now has 17 brands within its portfolio, and we found ourselves developing brands for a different type of customer, right? So the new business piece that you talked about, that allows people to feel like, basically within our portfolio, we want to serve up a variety of things that can apply or attract different customers. For example, we launched a brand a few years ago called Canopy that's really focused on farm to table, local cultures, and really integrating that so that, for example, if I'm a person from the Middle East and I'm traveling to one of the Canopy hotels, I can see cultures that are realistic to my experience and my multicultural things that I can identify and connect with. So, we're starting to think and look at the cultural aspects of individuals and the experiences that people have and try to integrate that more so that people feel more comfortable. Going into different settings. You may not feel comfortable going to a Waldorf because it's that old school kind of rat pack luxury, but you might feel more comfortable going to one of our Curio boutique hotels or one of our other brands.
And Motto, is that a new brand?
Yeah.
And it targets a younger generation with
Yeah,
a
it
smaller
does.
room footprint but a larger common space.
Yeah, larger common space. Motto really springboards off of the idea that some younger travelers just need the basics. You want to be able to shower, you want to be able to sleep, but you want to be able to have space that you can invite a colleague that's in your city to come over and co-work with you or have a conversation. So that's a great example because it's really thinking about the other aspects of our new and growing demographics that now have money to spend on hotels, and how can we then cater to some of their
You may
needs.
care more about experience
Yep.
than about luxury or room comfort.
Absolutely.
Just playing off of that, something that I always realize with Hilton and just spaces in general, and we noticed it here, which shout out to the entire space here, is when you build a space that is listening to your user, is listening not with the intent of just being multicultural, but just with the intent of building a great space. Like this space here is like, the gender neutral restrooms.
Right.
We're building a new space now, so I'm so in tune with what you guys are doing because we're asking ourselves these hard questions. We are, building an event space inside, and we're really stuck on doing a gender neutral restroom because we sat with our trans brothers and sisters and heard about the traumatic experience of just choosing a restroom in a given social situation and how that plagues them for a whole day. It can actually shut them down for the whole day.
Or when they're traveling, it's particularly troublesome in airports, for instance.
100%. And so for us, sticking and actually having to find the code, we're in Newark, New Jersey. Shout out to Newark. But just going to, I have to rap hard. They'll check my receipts, man. And so just
being recorded. So.
Yeah, it's like sewn in. But just listening in that, we had to dig for the codes. Again, shout out to you, Clayton, with all this. To find gender neutral restrooms, the actual codes that will allow us to build this space, because we do have a large LGBTQI enterprise presence in our space. That, for me, is an authentic way to get behind inclusion, and I think I see brands like Hilton doing that too. I think that's how you win. I think that's how you build brand loyalty, and ultimately that's how you'll get access to a really influential series of demographics.
Yeah, and if I can springboard from that, let's take so I cover all of any multicultural and or diversity space. So I'm always looking for the connections. But to your point, taking it to structural barriers, if we think of our differently abled brothers and sisters and the aging population, when you're dealing with older buildings that haven't essentially sort of moved into this phase of understanding the challenges that people can have, you run into things where you have restrooms that don't have appropriate spacing, or hotel rooms where the bed is too close to the wall. So it's those types of things that you have to look at when you think of the structural barriers as it relates to inclusive spaces.
And that ADA
like
isn't enough.
Exactly.
That's what I was also hearing a lot of. ADA compliance for differently abled individuals is actually below the bare minimum of their everyday need.
Correct.
You want to comment on that?
I think, the minimum is or ADA code
Can you
is the
just
minimum.
define what ADA?
The American Disabilities Act, so that's providing access to everything within a space for all types. So if you have a counter with a bar at it, you actually have to have a certain amount of linear feet of that bar, be it a ADA height, so it's accessible to someone in a wheelchair. But that code specifically is a minimum, so we like to get there and then actually push it further. And that's some of the exciting things with that code is that New York and some other cities are actually pushing that code to include the gender neutral bathroom. So if you have one restroom, it has to be gender neutral and ADA. So it's becoming that minimum requirement, and then therefore those of us that care can push it further.
Yeah. So which states did you say?
I have to look them up.
Okay, so it's like a handful.
Big
We've
code.
got
That's why I said I respect you
much
playing,
work.
because that's a really big
There's
book
a
of
wall
codes.
that, yeah.
And it's state by state?
Correct, yep.
Okay.
And then there is a national overlaying as well.
So we sort of glossed into, sort of glided into this idea of gender-neutral bathrooms, and it's more than just like a PC term. The use of a bathroom for someone whose gender identity may not match the presentation can be super challenging. At the very least, it can be uncomfortable. At the very worst, it could be a situation of physical or endangerment or verbal harassment. I have a friend who's a woman and identifies as a woman. She happens to present as very masculine. She walks into a women's room in an airport, and she walks into a men's room. She feels super uncomfortable. She walks into a women's room. Women have asked her, pull up your shirt, show me, prove that you're a woman, this kind of thing. So it's not a trivial matter.
It's intrinsic, especially when you
It's
incorporate
important.
the 8-hour workday.
Mhm.
Like, it's like you can't have this incident and walk away. This has happened. That for me, it's happened in a place that you will occupy an 8 to 10 hour window on, where your social constructs are also validated and conform, and you're already in a very sensitive space, and that you're building your own project along with just wanting that affirmation. So it's a traumatic experience.
And it's sort of a practical matter. Like, what do you do? You have a men's room and a women's room, or what do you do? Well, if you have a sort of a practical tip is if you have a single-use bathroom, there is really no reason to put a gender on that. That's just a bathroom, and it's not just gender non-conforming or transgender people that might want to use it. It could be you want a little privacy. You have a small child. You have to change whatever it is. There's a lot of reasons to use it. So the idea of a gender-neutral or all-gender or gender-welcome kind of facility. If your facilities have only stalls with latches on it, you may consider making that, or part of that architecturally perhaps, a gender neutral bathroom. So I just wanted to touch on that as a sort of an important topic. Anything else?
Definitely. In the consideration of our new office, in our old office, we had individual rooms for restrooms. Moving into the Woolworth building, probably the scariest thing for the staff to find out was that they were a men's and women's restroom divided by kind of old school partitions. And everyone's like, oh my God, I gotta go next to my coworker that I've never done that before. That was probably the
Right.
number one freak out on
How
the
do you
move.
deal with that?
So we then took the initiative to rip all that out. Obviously, the building's there and plumbed, and it's ancient history, so we can't really create the one gender-neutral bathroom. But what we did was actually kind of rebuild actual full-wall stalls in each of those men's and women's restrooms to create that environment that was a safe place. And kind of spinning off of that whole, you were talking about the transgenders, and then also that equality of the space, kind of tied into this whole process of moving offices and designing for your closest 115 employees. All helping with the punch list wasn't enough. We actually had an employee that I had the pleasure of hiring as a female, and through this whole design process has now legally and physically become a man. So during that whole process, there was conversation with that person of what are the restrooms going to be, and that obviously gave me special attention to that in detail. But I think the real cool True Hollywood story I always say about this person was that they decided through this process they came to me and said, I'm using you as a confidant and need you to kind of be my cheerleader, because obviously an easier thing for this person to do through this transition would have been to go somewhere else and arrive as him. But they decided, due to our culture and the design opportunities through this, that they were going to stick it out, and they wanted to be at this company for the people, and kind of chose me as their cheerleader to help at client meetings when the client has seen them in one day and now the next, and they're still slipping of the she and the he, and it's kind of a lesson for myself of how to address that person.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that ties back to your profession as well, and how you catch yourself doing that, and then trying to, once you figured it out, trying to help that public that's interacting with that person. So a successful story of she's staying with us and now using the men's restroom.
And
So,
you retained an excellent employee, so there was some money saved. You didn't have to replace.
yeah, that retention,
right?
one small detail.
So thank you.
Yeah, the question of bathrooms come up from time to time with our hotels, and I always ask them to provide options to respect people's comfort levels. Because we talked about transgender, but we didn't talk about gender fluid or non-binary folks, right? So if you provide an array of options where people can use the restroom that they feel most comfortable using, I think we tend to be in a better situation.
And remember, we all grew up with gender-neutral bathrooms, really, right? All welcome in the bathroom at my house, anyway. Yeah, oh my God, this time is going by. We hardly got to any all of the questions, but we're opening up to Q&A, and I do have other questions if no one has a question. Oh, I see a question right here.
Hi there, my name is Christine Ramsey. I lead D&I for Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and I'm just so fascinated by this space. We talked a little bit about physical disabilities, but I wanted to address a question on invisible disabilities. I think I opened up to the group earlier. I have a son with autism. He's 6. And this has opened my eyes to inclusive spaces because there are none for the neurodiverse community, to the point that we got to find quiet spaces. I bring my own beanbag for him to hotels because when we travel, there's sound when we talk about music. I mean, it's so hard. I have to take the headphones, and there's no spaces to accommodate. And this is for everybody, right? It's intersectionality. Anyone can be on as a neurodiverse person. So just curious to hear what your experience has been for neurodiverse individuals and any best practices. And if not, I would love to be a resource for you.
Awesome.
And
Well,
connect you to,
we'll swap cards
people.
later, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody want to take that?
I think it's creating the opportunity. I think you kind of mentioned it before, but now that the workplace has gone to the sea of workstations, no private space for phone calls or to get away, we've seen the shift back to privacy and that kind of personal space and wellness. So I just keep using ours as an example, but we implemented on many of our clients, everything from the phone rooms breaking up the private offices, but we also have the wellness room, which is doubling as that place that you need to get away, but what do we put in these rooms? And everything from the beanbags to the rocking chair for the nursing mother, refrigerators, the lighting is different, creating that place of home, getting out of the work-life lighting, escape rooms, not so much of terror, but they're a room to escape into that has like the windows and views and lighting and other kind of music and sounds. So kind of creating an opportunity of spaces.
And I'd love to hear from more of like a retail and a tourism space, because that's a super interesting question.
Yeah.
So I was experiencing a lot of what the open space didn't work for my share space concept. I think while it is wonderful visually for sweeping vistas, and I get that component, we do have a little great room, we call it, where everyone co-works together. But we have these zones, so just there's one area where it's completely green astroturf and plants and completely light filled, where a lot of people like to take. We have meditation mats in those sections to build this kind of serenity space, and we got this from a lot of our actual female founders. Were saying they just needed a space that was a little bit more natural to be in, to reset themselves. At certain points in the day, you have to reset yourself to work. On top of actually having almost family-based spaces. So we have one great table that everyone sits around when we eat. Another zone we have is our living room area, which was designed by an incredible designer, Neffy Walker, who started talking about color palettes and textures and touching fabrics that calm. So for me, the new iteration of our space is really about these privacy zones. We're talking about, of course, the new standard is, a nursing room, but we're also talking about female empowerment spaces as a new feature to have in this environment. And also, I've been exploring, there are some share spaces that actually have these units for the for children alongside the working space, along the workspace of the client. I'm fascinated by the most organic way to build a space for the everyday worker, because we're not, if anything, this conversation, this experience is about, we're not one group. We're all individuals. How can we build spaces and listen to that to build it? So for me, it's about building zones within it. And what I would say in the everyday of traveling, what I have found, and as I was saying, my background is in marketing and strategy, is challenge those brands. Challenge the hotels you're going to visit. Challenge the restaurants you're going to see. Ask them.
Let's
send them
challenge
email.
Andrea.
Yes.
How would you handle, like, if she's coming to your hotel?
A simple best practice. It's so simple. Ask questions from a place of understanding, right? Because a question can do a couple of things. You can be asking to fill a knowledge gap, but you can also be asking to help fill someone else's knowledge gap, right? And to really help them sort of open up the conversation. So thank you for asking your question. Fabulous color, pink coat, by the way.
Good stuff. Any other questions? Way back there, I think. Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Tequila of TWPR. My question is for Medina. How are you setting yourself apart from other co-working spaces who had some challenges or stories come out about rampant diversity issues, inclusion issues, particular members feeling like they're not a part of the space or having, different interactions with people who work at the space? How do you think about how you're designing your space in a structural way, but also within your programming, things of that sort?
Thank you for the question. So it's like a simple layered answer. The actual reason I started Equal Space was not that I thought I would own a share space. It was because I, as a person who has gone to several co-working spaces, walked in and didn't feel affirmed and didn't feel included in the upward mobility of that space. I won't name them because we don't need to. But from that pain point and seeing all these startups overlooked, I wanted to build a space that would include who I've always betted on and known were brilliant. And then what we do is, out of a 365-day calendar, we program half of it. We have veterans coding courses. We have 80% of the programming is free and accessible because accessing these rooms should not be allocated to just the Ivy League circuit. And so programmatically, my team also reflects the community. We're in Newark, New Jersey. We reflect hiring locals and bringing in specialists to build for the community that I service. And so programmatically, we do everything from, we will have a culture builder, which is your standard, like, great kegger and cultured beer night, to also having next month we're having a independent filmmaker showcases work with 3 different performers who are from Newark. That kind of action every day at Equal Spaces differentiates. Also, out of most of the co-working facilities in the country, mine is Black and brown owned. I'm not a face for any company. I'm not hired nor bought. I am the product. I service what I need for those who need it.
Right. I love it. We're winding down, actually, less than 10 minutes. I want to maybe move to the tips and guidance section. So we want our beloved audience, to unleash the influence that we're going to help them with and think through. So why don't you start, maybe, and maybe the top tips that you can give them to go back to their workplaces, their colleagues, their fellow entrepreneurs, and how do they move forward? How do they start thinking really just like, what's the next step? I want to go back to my office. What do I do?
Good question. I would take it from the standpoint of how I approach every new project. Definitely get in front of the people and ask them, talk to the people, get them in a room or create some sort of questionnaire. We've created Pinterest boards for companies. We've walked in and be like, okay, give us your key focus groups, which then at some clients, they give us all 400 of their employees, and that's where I'm like, okay, so let's create a Pinterest board. What do you want your desk to look like? What do you want your conference to look like? And you'd be surprised in what you get back, and that the desk has got the cold brew in it, and the conference rooms have a beach with surfers and the pictures that relate to these different buckets. And then you kind of dive into it with them, and you ask them, okay, what does this mean? You want your conference room to feel like a beach. What does that actually mean? And then so you kind of dig into it and figure out that they want a calm, soothing space that they can have a conversation with their clients in. And so you kind of really need to talk to your people and hear what they have to say. I think client understanding is our biggest approach, and that's the beginning of every project for us.
Hospitality has so much to teach other industries, and hospitality has been doing this for a long time. So you could probably write a book about this, but if you can kind of... In fact.
Coming soon. Kidding, but not really. So 2 things. One, you don't have to have diversity in your title to make a difference. This work affects every single person in this room. Secondly, hold people accountable. If you see something that's happening, I'm not saying in every case, obviously I'm asking for you to be appropriate, to call somebody out right on the spot, but pull someone aside and say, hey, just want to understand where that was coming from with that situation with so-and-so. Hold people accountable. I think people need to, you know how that sign where we see on the train, if you see something, say something. I need you to take that on in your personal and your professional life, because this change matters and it impacts all of us.
Just see something, change something. I'll just give two. One is start with your interior self. So my tip for everyone is by really isolating what I know I need to engage every day and what I know my lines in the sand are, it helps me to engage sometimes very oppositional environments that I have to walk into. And yes, it's self-worth building, but for me, lining my interior and exterior and knowing what I'm going to encounter by knowing myself helps me to do the change work that I really want to do. So that's what I would love. This room is filled with amazing change makers. So do that for yourself, because that's something we always leave last on the list is, include yourself in the list of things that you should be arming and taking care of. On the second external, if you cannot understand someone's given pain point, find an empathy of and try to seek out a commonality in understanding their experience. And I do that a lot by listening and sitting with people who have vastly different experiences from me. Through that work, I'm able to say when someone is using or mispronouncing a pronoun or not opening up the avenue for pronoun discussion. No, this is a very essential part. I'm very fortunate to be a professor at Rutgers, and I start every semester with that question. What is an affirmation and or pronoun that you would like to? It's not the university standard, but it's my standard. So when you are there and you've listened to someone else's experience, you can do the change work for them and protect them and be a sword and shield. And that sometimes is really necessary. Don't assume everyone's 100% to fight for themselves.
That's great. Those are great tips. I'm actually going to use one. I'm going to start teaching a course at NYU, and I'm going to start with that, with the pronouns.
Hell yeah.
Thank you. We still have a few more minutes, so I don't see any more hands. Yes, right here.
Hi, Erin Streck. I work for the Opportunity Agenda. It's a social justice nonprofit, and I have a question regarding creating inclusive physical spaces. So what would you suggest for organizations that don't have the budget to really redo these miraculous, beautiful spaces that can provide inclusive spaces? Do you have maybe suggestions that are small things we can do around the office to create an inclusive environment for people who work there?
Thank you for the question. And perhaps even funding sources that you might not be aware of. I don't know if there's so many funding sources in New York, you'd be shocked at what's available for entrepreneurs. But anybody want to take that question?
I would say for some of the small things you could do, kind of experimental things that I actually did with our office and kind of seeing what kind of spaces people needed, was kind of rearrange what you do have. Private offices, obviously we've all heard the shift from private offices to open work plan, and now the shift back to privacy. Turning some of those private offices into other private areas. Are they collaboration rooms? So you take out the desk or leave the desk and just push it to the middle and get the chairs around it. Kind of create that huddle room or collaboration room, which brings teams together. Kind of bringing the people together, I think, is one huge step. If there's anywhere you can create that social cafe, the walls to a lunchroom may be very confining. Maybe there's another space. Maybe it's in reception that's got a larger area that you could turn into kind of a communal space and kind of bring that forward into the reception area.
So the simple things because grassroots, guerrilla, self-funded, I feel you. Some of the things are, again, listening to some of what the employee needs are by blank survey. We do this with our spacers is what we call them. And there's some surprising small shifts you can do, like they wanted more diverse selection for coffee and tea. Okay, that's like a $5 to $10 shift in our budget allocation. It's not that's not breaking the bank. And thank God, my partner Raphael, I love you, he's in the room. Was like, no, we should have more selections of coffee. Yes, your cold brew is on the list, Clayton. Come visit. The other part were more snacks. That they wanted more snacks. Another one was that the cafe area needed a little bit of life. That's paint. That's an easy, hey, would you guys come in and we can just co-paint this space together if it's on that kind of, and funny enough, the painting time I've had with my team happens to be some of our funnest laughter and bonding time.
Leave your mark.
Talk about the word wall real quick, too. Don't you have a word wall?
Do.
Yeah.
I think that's the participation, get the people involved. Back to your paint, kind of leaving your mark. We ask a lot of our clients, employees to leave their mark on the space so that they can take ownership in it. So I think that painting party is a key exhibit. Another thing was creating a word wall. What does this company mean to you is what we ask the people, or who are we? And we put all those sayings, phrases, numbers all on a wall, and that's in one of our large walls in the social cafe, and it really amplifies who we are. It was our people's words, and now it's physicalized on this wall. So really letting people leave their mark. So, and another example that our Seattle office had a remodel as well, and they had a demo party where they actually take out those frustrations of moving maybe, and that fear of what your new space looks like. And we handed out environmentally friendly spray paint, and they destroyed the existing space or helped demo it. So I think really engaging the employee, engaging the people, letting them leave their mark, really contributing to the space.
We've added bean bags to the point that the young woman mentioned earlier, and then also offering different options in food. So think of your gluten-free or vegan folks. We added fruit. We started adding
pasta today.
We did, and it was really good. Thank you, She Summit. But little things.
And last word to Andrea. So that's it. Thank you, awesome panelists. Woo!